Hey everybody, it's Mr. Marvin. In this video I'm going to give you some specific feedback on your background report final drafts. So as you can see, I'm coming to you from my new underground basement lair in the new house. Hopefully the audio and video quality are okay. As usual, I've got a fairly short list of grievances here to share with you. These are common issues that I saw when I was grading your background report final drafts. As always, not all of these things will apply to every single one of you, but you'll want to write down the things that you want to ensure that you improve upon for next time. I think overall the background reports were pretty solid. You guys are a pretty solid group. And just want to reiterate at the top of the video that this background report is going to serve as the first half of your research project. So as you start to compose your position paper in the next couple of weeks, the last couple of weeks of the course, you can assume that your reader has read your background report and is now moving into your position paper. So of course the background report is where you explain what they say, that is what you have found in your research, and your position paper is what you have to say, where you weigh in to that conversation that you have become qualified to participate in through your research. Before I forget, I just want to reiterate one more time that there is no class on Monday the 12th, I believe, whatever that Monday the 12th is, because that is our vacation week, so we will not have a formal class period that evening, but of course you will still have plenty of tasks to complete, so just follow the course outline as always. Let me also say that when it comes to putting these two halves of the research project together, I'm going to talk about this more in the future, I'm sure, but let me just give you a heads up about it now. Remember, we're going to put these two halves of the research project together at the end of the semester to make one big paper. So with that being said, you want to be mindful of how your background report begins and how your background report ends so that these two halves of your paper kind of fit seamlessly together. So a couple things you want to be aware of. The first thing is the introduction to your research project. Now, depending on how you wrote your introduction for your background report, you may kind of already have this in the bag. Because if your introduction to your background report sort of did all the typical introduction things, that is, introduced your topic, drew the reader in, kind of explained sort of the structure of your paper, how you're going to go about it, alluded to your thesis statement, all that sort of typical introduction stuff, and then you moved into the background report, then you may not need to compose a new introduction later on. But if your background report just starts with background report, then you might later on in the process want to compose a new introduction that sort of introduces the research project as a whole. So what I envision you guys doing is having an introduction that sort of introduces the topic, alludes to your thesis statement, previews the structure of your paper, and then you move into the background report, and then you move into your position paper later on, where you sort of come back to the thesis and prove your own argument with your own analysis and synthesis and that sort of thing. So it's just something to be aware of in terms of how your background report begins. Start to consider whether you feel like you can use the intro of your background report as the intro for your entire project, or if you might need to go back and sort of compose a fresh introduction to the entire project a little bit later on. Along those same lines, also be mindful of how your background report ends. Some of you did a very nice job of sort of summing up your background report and alluding to your argument that is going to be the centerpiece of your position paper, but some of your background reports just sort of ended with the end of your background section and didn't really have a transition to the second half of the research project. So that'll be something you'll want to add later on if need be as well. Okay? So I have a pretty short list of specific things here. Some of these will be grammatical, some of them will be larger, more conceptual things. Several of them will be things from previous videos. If you're watching this video, you're probably not somebody who is making mistakes that we've talked about before. But even if you are, that's totally fine. Just make sure that you are continuing to try to get a little bit better every single time, trying not to make the same mistakes in a row. Remember, one of the best ways to be a good student is to only allow yourself to need to be told something once. And eventually, people will run out of things that they need to tell you. They'll run out of mistakes that they need to correct. And that's how we get a little bit better every single time. So this wasn't on my list, but it still bears repeating. Make sure that you are following directions when it comes to submitting your papers. Make sure you're submitting them using the submission links. Make sure they're in Word document format. Make sure that you are naming your files properly. Again, it's not a big deal in the grand scheme of the universe, but it does contribute to your perceived reputation and how others perceive your work. Attention to detail matters, and so you always want to remember that your life's work is just a collection of tiny details and tiny decisions. Okay? All right, so let's talk about who versus that. I think we've talked about this before. It's people who and things that, right? So you would say people who paint are known as painters, right? As opposed to clocks that ring are kind of annoying. So it's people who, things that. Technically, people that is slightly improper usage, and of course, you would never say things who. So people who, things that. That's just a little habit to get into. Always make sure you're trying to be as specific as possible. This is a blanket rule across the board, right? We've been talking about this since day one with our thesis statements, but it also is something that you can apply to every sentence and phrase in your own writing, right? So when you say research was conducted that showed, somebody like me is going to say, what research? Research that was conducted by whom? What are you talking about? This is like when students like to say, studies have shown that. Any good writing teacher is going to, or any good teacher, period, is going to ask you, what studies? What are you talking about? You have to be specific, right? And of course, you can't just make up the fact that research was conducted. If you're going to say that research was conducted or that studies have shown, you have to be able to point to the research. You have to be able to point to the studies. So make sure that you are as specific as you can be. And that just makes you look even more qualified, even more informed about your topic, even more credible. Continue to watch out for ambiguous pronouns. I think we're getting pretty good at mitigating these, but they do still tend to pop up here and there. Remember, you can't just say this shows that, something, 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 because your reader's not going to know what this refers to. This is challenging for me, right? Especially when I'm trying to leave commentary on your paper and I want to say something like, this is confusing, right? It's very easy to sort of say that. Now, I have the advantage of highlighting the specific word or words that I find confusing, but when you have a sentence, right, where the reader has to figure out what this refers to, that's not really work that you want to make your readers have to do. So just be careful of those ambiguous pronouns that continue to pop up. Remember that the history of the issue needs to be relevant to your argument. So we talked about this in class when we looked at some people's drafts. But the background report, once again, works in tandem with the position paper. So that means that the point of the background report is not just to fill up 3 or 4 pages with random information about the history or different perspectives on your issue. You are trying to present your reader with the most relevant information that they're going to need to know to be able to follow your argument. So the background report has a purpose. It's to inform the reader, but it's not just to inform them about a bunch of random stuff about your topic. It's to inform them about the specific things that they're going to need to know about to be able to follow your argument and your position paper later on. Okay? So if you treated your background report as just trying to find as many facts or random information about your topic as you could find to just fill up the pages and inform your reader that way, I mean, you might want to rethink your approach, because the background report, again, has a purpose. It's to inform, but it's not just to inform randomly or haphazardly about the topic. It's to inform deliberately, intentionally, in the same way that you specifically choose a specific word with intention because it's the best word for the job. You also need to ask yourself specifically, what is the best information, the most important, the most relevant information that my reader is going to need to know to be able to follow my position paper later on, okay? Yes, all right. Naked quotes. Most of you understand that naked quotes are bad and you know how to introduce them properly. This is something that we would probably have spent a lot more time on if the course was longer than just 6 weeks. But you have to make sure that you are introducing quotes properly and commenting on them fully. I can only tell you to read chapter 3 so many times. I can only tell you to reread chapter 3. And I say so many times. But it really is, like I've said, it really is a cornerstone of academic writing. If you're just dropping quotes in randomly, if you're just kind of introducing them with a colon and not really commenting on them, not really introducing the author names or the article titles or that sort of thing, it's your paper is never going to be as effective as it would be otherwise. You remember that a quote is like a puzzle piece, right? When it's in a complete puzzle, it makes complete sense. But if you're going to take somebody else's puzzle piece, somebody else's sentence or idea, take it out of their puzzle, their essay, and put it into your own puzzle, your own essay, you need to take care to make sure that it fits. You need to set up the quote by telling the reader who the author is, what they have written, what their credentials are, why we should trust them, what article they wrote, what the title of the article is, what the quote says. You need to be very sort of deliberate in leading your reader into the quote, and then you give them the quote on a nice silvery pillow, and then you comment on that quote. You explain what the quote means, why you're making them read the quote, what you want your reader to think about the quote, not just moving on to something else. I can't overstate the importance of this skill enough. And so I just hope you take it seriously, because this will be something that you need to do in all future academic classes, right? All of academia is about thinking critically about other people's ideas and very frequently responding to other people's ideas in writing, and you need to know how to do that effectively. A little grammatical thing, which versus that. So you need a comma before which. The possum, comma, which ran across the road, comma, didn't make it. The core of this sentence is the possum didn't make it, right? This is an embedded clause that adds additional information, which ran across the road, right? So it adds additional information. You need a comma before which here. The commas slow you down, so it causes the sentence to sound a little bit different. If you went like this, and you put the word that here instead of which, you would not need the commas. That way you would read it straight through. The possum that ran across the road didn't make it. This sounds different to the ears, but it also means a slightly different thing, because you're saying the possum that ran across the road didn't make it, but the possum that didn't run across the road did make it, for example. As opposed to the which version. The which version, right, kind of de-emphasizes the ran across the road part. That's sort of just an extra detail. The core of the sentence is that the possum didn't make it. Okay, so commas with which, no commas with that, and notice the difference in how the sentences sound and a slight difference in what they mean. I already talked about introducing quotes fully. Just make sure that you introduce quotes with authors and with their article titles. I saw quite a few background reports that made no mention of any other writers or thinkers. And that's a little bit concerning, because we've been using quotes all summer long, right? Sort of, again, a cornerstone of the course. So remember that academic work is about engaging in conversation with other writers, and doing that requires that you introduce your reader to the other writers that you have read, and that you sort of respond to their ideas writer to writer, as opposed to just kind of ignoring who wrote it and just putting their words in quotation marks. Parenthetical citations in MLA format. MLA format, let's just say MLA, parenthetical citations. Started to see a lot of funky stuff in the background report with the parenthetical citations. This kind of makes sense, because this is the first paper that we're doing that requires you to use scholarly journal articles. Whereas with the first two papers, your articles probably came from the internet, and if you used the author's name and explained what the title of the article was, then you probably didn't need to put anything in your parenthetical citation, but now you're definitely going to. So the author wrote rainbows are beautiful. And you put 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is the parenthetical citation. In MLA format, parenthetical citations only have one of two things, right? Or one or two things. Either the author's name, which if you introduce the author properly, right, in your quote setup, you don't need to put author here, because that's just redundant, right? Or the page number, right? So if it's a scholarly journal article, or if it's a book, or it's something that has page numbers, you would put the page number in the parentheses here. That's it. I saw a lot of full bibliographic entries in parenthetical citations. That's incorrect. I saw a lot of article titles in parenthetical citations. I saw a lot of newspaper titles in parenthetical citations, and none of that should go in your parenthetical citation. There are some rare cases where you might do something like that, but for the most part, the general rule is author names and or page numbers, and that is it, okay, for your works cited. For your parenthetical citations. Obviously, you put the whole shebang in your works cited pages. Square brackets look like this. Square brackets are used for editorial changes on the part of you, the writer. So if you're going to say Smith writes, and then let's say the quote starts with it, right? It demonstrates how something. Page 1, 2, 3. Now, if you just drop this quote in here, your reader is probably not going to know what it refers to unless you take very deliberate care to explain that in your quote setup. So you might do something like this. You might replace the it, an ambiguous pronoun, with square brackets that clarify what the thing is, whatever the it is. I don't know, Jones's theorem. Right, something like that. So that way, this tells the reader that you changed the words, and you did that so that the quote would make sense to the reader. And we care a ton about making sure our quotes make sense to the reader. So this is a handy tool to know how to use. If you have an author who cites another author and you want to cite the author that is cited by the author, so let's say you have author A is quoting author B. And you say something like, author B states, here's the quote. Technically, you need to put QTD period in author A to indicate to your reader that author B did not write the article that you're citing. They are just quoted or cited in author A's article. You can also do this in the setup for your quote. You can say author A cites author B, who states, boom. And then you can just do the usual page number thing. But QTD in is another way to explain when one author is quoted in another author's work. Comma splices. We almost got to the end of the video without talking about comma splices, but a comma splice is a comma that separates two complete sentences. The possum ran across the road, comma, it didn't make it, period. This is a comma splice. You have a comma that is separating two complete sentences. Comma's not strong enough to do that. You have to add a conjunction. The possum ran across the road, comma, but it didn't make it. Or you could put a period there and capitalize the it, which reads a little bit differently. The possum ran across the road. It didn't make it. Okay, so watch out for those comma splices. And finally, don't use topic sentences as your concluding sentence. So I'm sure we've talked about this before at this point, but remember that a paragraph should be a self-contained unit, right? It should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It should focus on one main idea. A paragraph should have one job, one purpose, and that job should clearly tie back to your overall thesis statement. You don't want to introduce an entirely new main idea in the last sentence of a paragraph because it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. Right? So if you have a dog paragraph, dogs, 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 and then your last sentence is cats are also cool, your reader's going to be very confused because that sentence has nothing to do with the dog paragraph. Why is there a random cat sentence at the end of this paragraph? Because it should be a fairly self-contained unit. So what you want to do is make that last sentence your topic sentence of the next paragraph. New paragraph means a new main idea. So don't introduce new main ideas at the end of paragraphs, generally speaking. I think at some point somebody told you that this is a good way to transition to the next paragraph. That doesn't make any sense to me. you transition from the next paragraph by indenting, by having a strong concluding sentence that wraps up the main idea of the paragraph, by indenting to visually cue your reader that a new idea is coming, and then maybe you have a transitional phrase like "on the other hand," right, or "in addition," right, or "furthermore," whatever. Okay? That's all I've got. So, if you have any questions about anything I said in this video or anything I did not say in the video, please do feel free to post in course questions. As always, I am happy to clarify. Your background report will reappear in your final research project at the end of the course in just a couple of weeks. So feel free to go back and revise things. The points for the background report are on the books, however. The remaining points are going to be all based on the position paper. We're just going to compile that position paper with your background report at the end so that you have a single comprehensive research project to show for yourself. One more time, no class on Monday the 12th because I am away, but make sure that you follow the course outline. Don't think that you don't have any work to do. It's important that we still make effective use of this week, obviously, so that when we come back for our 6th and final class, we'll be able to be as efficient as possible. Okay? So have a good Monday off, and I will see you guys next time.